Chapter 49. Jason and Dennis were back on the Bombardier Challenger 300 business jet they had flown on when they visited the president a couple of weeks ago. Jason wondered if the government had a fleet of these things. Listening to some music with a set of personal headphones, Jason was in his own world, thinking about the task lying before him. Dennis chose to continue his reading of the classified material given to them by the Admiral. About halfway into the flight to Miami, Dennis put the laptop to the side and gave his eyes a rest after reading for about 2 hours solid. Looking over to his friend as he stared out the window, Dennis pondered what Jason must be thinking now. He thought about how much he admired his friend. Jason seemed to have so many parts of his life well in order, whereas Dennis sometimes felt balancing work and a home life was like trying to reach for the unattainable. His first marriage failed because he didn't show enough attention to his wife. What really made that particular thought distasteful to Dennis was a rumor that the Admiral had the same problem. So in that way, he and Dennis were similar. Being similar to the Admiral in any way was something which made Dennis shudder. That alone was enough to make him take a new personal inventory about what's really important in life. It wasn't only that. This whole odyssey he and Jason were now embarking on was something that could end up really good, or it could go south very easily. The unsettling thing about all of it was if the timeline actually did get changed, causing a grandfather paradox, the odds are Jason, Diana, the Admiral, and about 8 billion others would never know it. Everything would just suddenly cease to exist. Yep, very unsettling. As he stared at the floor of the jet, contemplating this, he realized how that possibility might be making Jason downright panicky. And yet, glancing over to Jason as he stared out the window, it seemed like he was the very personification of poise and calmness. Without him knowing it, Dennis came to have an even deeper respect for his friend right then. As he regarded Jason, he thought about how, in a very real way, the weight of the world was now going to rest on his shoulders. Jason happened to be thinking that same thing right then, and what made this an even more thankless job is nobody could know that he did it. Sure, important people like the president and those he chose to trust with this most secret of technologies would know, and he would certainly receive accolades from those few sources. But for the most part, John and Jane Q. Public would just go on living their respective lives, completely oblivious as to how close they came to having their lives and the lives of their husbands, wives, and children completely snuffed out of existence. It wasn't the lack of fame that bothered Jason. What bothered him the most was there were people out there so caught up in their own lives they thought the comparatively minor crises they were dealing with represented the end of their particular world. Jason thought if people really knew their lives were in such dire peril, and as a collective life form, they were all at risk of losing their lives unless they banded together in unity and harmony. As Jason looked out the window of the speeding jet watching the ground pass by, he reflected on how people formulate their social and political values. It seemed so petty how nationalism blinded people into believing their ideologies superior to anything that had ever been done before or anything else currently being done by any other social or political ideologies of the day. With the knowledge Jason now possessed, he seemed to have the same viewpoint of many astronauts coming back to Earth. He reached back into the recesses of his mind and thought about an online article. Why give a damn? posted by astronaut Ron Garan. We have within our grasp the resources and technology to solve many, if not all, of the problems facing our planet. Yet nearly 1 billion people do not have access to clean water. Countless go to bed hungry every night, and many die from completely preventable and curable diseases. Indeed, thought Jason. As the jet sped along, a new idea began to form in his mind. The portal technology is something that could be used for tremendous bad if put into the wrong hands, but could also be used for tremendous good. What if food, medicine, and supplies miraculously showed up in the exact place where they were needed? About this time, the captain's voice came across the speakers.
Attention all who are flying with us today. We are landing at Miami International in about 10 minutes, so please stow your things in preparation for landing. That is all.
Because of his headphones, Jason didn't hear the announcement. Dennis tapped him on the knee. We're about to land, bud, and we need to batten down the hatches. We're there already? Asked Jason. Yep, next stop. Dennis arched his eyebrows. Well, you know. Yes, indeed, said Jason. Then he asked a question which occurred to him earlier, but he hadn't had the chance to ask. Did you ever get pictures of the personnel we're going to meet with at you-know-where? No, never did, replied Dennis. But I suppose we're going to find out soon enough. There were the typical pass-throughs by the flight attendants, and within a few minutes, the plane pulled to a stop. As soon as it stopped and the door opened, a black Hummer with black-tinted windows pulled up to the stairs, and the driver got out to meet Jason and Dennis. He must have been part of the Secret Service since he was a cookie-cutter copy of Agents Lockwood and Elder, who took them to see the president. After being quickly taken to the marina, they boarded a small boat belonging to the Coast Guard. The captain said this was a fast boat. Even so, the voyage would take the better part of 4 hours. He suggested that if they were tired, they could rack out down below. They had indeed been burning their candles at both ends, so the suggestion of a healthy nap sounded pretty good to both men. In the blink of an eye, Jason and Dennis were rousing themselves out of bed after simultaneously sensing the shrill whine of the turbo engines had just been tamed down to the purr of a caged animal. They both decided to see what was happening back on the bridge. Jason and Dennis approached the captain, but he was concentrating to the extreme. Deciding not to interrupt him, they just observed what was happening. Their presence wasn't lost on the captain. Using his peripheral vision, he said without shifting his gaze in the slightest, "This part's tricky, gentlemen, since the slightest miscalculation will mean we'll all have a bad day." Looking out the window, it wasn't obvious to Jason in the least what was so tricky, as the captain said. In front of them were some of the most beautiful seas one could ever ask for. In fact, it appeared not only the sea, but the weather outside was absolutely perfect. "I'm not sure what you're looking at, Captain," said Dennis, "but I wouldn't mind going for a nice swim right about now." "That is the deception of it." Turning to his navigator, he asked, "Position?" 200 yards east of position Delta. Turn to starboard in 1 minute, 20 seconds, Captain," replied the seaman to his left. At the 1-minute mark, the seaman set a timer at a station for 60 seconds. As it counted down, the captain ritualistically shifted his gaze back and forth between the forward windows and the timer. As soon as the timer ticked down to 0, he called out a new command. "Officer of the watch, come starboard 90 degrees in 3, 2, 1. Now," bellowed the captain. The officer of the watch relayed the command to the quartermaster in charge of the directional controls of the boat. and immediately made a change to its heading. Dennis was watching the controls being manipulated by the quartermaster and was tickled that the overall direction of a ship this size was being manipulated by relatively tiny controls, about the size of his fist. He went to point this out to Jason, but then noticed his friend staring out the front window with a shocked look on his face. Dennis looked out the same window to see what Jason was staring at in this featureless sea. As soon as he did, he saw it wasn't so featureless anymore. Like a wraith forming from the mist churned up by the waves, a most magnificent sight materialized right before their eyes. It was not only a city, but it was the city, the same one they had seen through the portal. All on the bridge were quiet, except for the newly restored sound of the engines roaring back to life. "Where the hell did that come from?" asked Dennis. The captain chuckled. "Everybody asked that the first time, me included." Visibly more relaxed now, he continued, "What we were doing back there was navigating our way through a very specific set of turns, all designed to get us through an elaborate doorway in the shield surrounding this city." Looking out the window at the magnificent city looming larger and larger every moment, he said, "Gentlemen, I give you the island of New Galimar." The moment was historic for Jason and Dennis, who had never personally been here before. Seemingly miles across, an adequate description of the island was more than any storyteller could possibly conjure up in a lifetime. The tropical paradise was unbelievably majestic, with sunlight glinting from the marvelous structures all nestled in a paradise of palm trees, plants, shrubs, and flowering plants. Jason and Dennis were mute, trying their best to take in all that lay before them. The landing craft pulled up to a dock, and all began disembarking from the boat. Amazed at the towering structures arching their way for thousands of meters over his head, Jason almost forgot the cases he had brought with him, including his laptop. He had to repeatedly reorient himself as he walked up the pier, since he spent more time looking up than watching where he was going. It wasn't until he almost walked directly into a tall woman with a very commanding tangle of red hair that he stopped looking up and was struck by the beauty standing in front of him. It seemed he had seen her before, and it wasn't until Dennis said, "Dr. Lindstrom, I presume?" did Jason realize who she was. "Correct. I am Dr. Terry Lindstrom, but you can call me Terry. And I assume you are Doctors Marsalis and Green?" "Correct," responded Jason, "but you can call me Jason, and this is Dennis." "Very good," responded Terry. Pointing to the man on her left, she said, "This is my assistant, Joe. He has been my right-hand man while working here on the island." Jason and Dennis looked at Joe, then looked at each other with a look of amazement. Volumes of thought passed back and forth between the two men, such as how the Admiral had authorized Terry and her assistant to know about the portal technology. But there was something else, something much more significant than that. Without a word, Jason was the one to verbalize what the two men were thinking. "Joe?" Rolling his R's in the way common to those of Latin descent, Joe responded, "Correct." "Are you sure?" asked Jason. "Don't you normally go by José Barragón y Cisneros?" Now it was José's turn to have his eyes bug out while looking at Jason. Terry scrunched her eyebrows together, then turned to Joe to ask what he was talking about when she saw the look of pure astonishment on his face. "What's going on here?" asked Terry. Looking at her, Jason said, "There's a lot to tell you, Terry, but we can't do it here." We need somewhere a lot more secluded so I can tell you what's going to be happening in the next few days, all of which is highly classified. We can't talk about it out in the open like this." "Well, okay then," retorted Terry. "Perhaps you can tell me what all the hubbub has been about lately. Since that Admiral guy was here, I've had to answer some rather odd questions, so I'm glad to have someone who will fill me in on what's going on."
With that, Dennis asked, "Are we going to your apartment in that high-rise over there?"
"Well, that's not really my apartment. I'm only staying there." She stopped dead in her tracks, spun around, then exclaimed, "How could you possibly have known I was staying in an apartment up there in that building?" This is when Jason put two and two together and realized Terry was the redhead they had seen when they first connected to the island with the portal. They just happened to see Dr. Lindstrom long before knowing who she was. "Soon enough, Doctor, your questions will be answered. I assume you will want to invite Dr. Marlowe, who has been living with you in that apartment as well?" Now it was Terry's turn to have a completely astonished look on her face. "You have got to tell me how you know all this." She was almost yelling, yet with a smile on her face. Jason laughed out loud and said, "Oh no, this is way too much fun." Getting a look of mock anger on her face, Terry shook her finger at Jason and said, "Oh, I'll get you for that." She finished her threat with a healthy dose of smiles and sneers. Walking along, the four of them came to the side of a building clad in what appeared to be glass mirrors. Knowing she had some tricks up her own sleeves, Terry made like she was going to walk right into the side of the building. As she approached, the side panels of the building transformed, and suddenly there was an entryway leading into what looked like a lobby area. At the rear, a door opened into what proved to be an alien elevator, which led the team to the top floor of the building. Jason and Dennis noted they had to clear their eardrums about 4 times as the elevator ascended. They emerged from the lift into what appeared to be a lounge, where it would be very easy to engage in a relaxed conversation. Waiting for them was another woman. "Gentlemen, this is my partner in crime, Dr. Lynn Marlowe." The brunette, green-eyed beauty shook their hands. Jason noted that Dennis had to work hard at keeping his tongue in his mouth. Knowing the type of woman who fascinated his friend, Jason understood that Lynn represented relationship nirvana for Dennis. "It's a pleasure to meet you, gentlemen. Please call me Lynn. I am looking forward to working with you." "It seems," said Terry, "these two will finally have some answers for us as to all the hurdles we've been jumping over lately." "Oh?" remarked Lynn. "That's good, because I'm just about ready to shoot myself over the way nobody is talking around here." "Please don't do that," said Dennis. "I'm sure we'll be able to answer all your questions." "Good!" exclaimed both women simultaneously. The 5 made their way to a comfortably appointed conversation pit, where couches were arranged in a circle, all decorated with pillows of different colors. They took their seats, and Terry was the first one to speak. "All right, out with it. How did you know all those things?" "What things?" asked Lynn. "They knew I lived in the apartment. They knew you were living there with me. And they knew something I didn't even know. Joe's real name is actually José Barragón y Cisneros." Lynn looked rather surprised at this revelation, and José spoke up for the first time since the 2 men arrived.
"I am very interested in knowing how this came about as well. That is information I have not shared with anybody here."
"The answer to both those questions is actually the same answer," Jason said. "I need to fill you in on a lot, so get comfortable, because there is a great deal to go over." Jason and Dennis then related a very long and detailed story, leading up to the invention of the portal and what it had the ability to do. Do you remember a story recently about a terrorist cell that was destroyed? How it was planning on carrying out another bombing, and how President Michelson ordered a strike that took them out? Asked Jason. Yes, of course. The story was everywhere in the news about a week ago, replied Lynn. That order was based on intelligence obtained from the portal, said Jason. You gotta be kidding. It's that accurate? Jason looked over to Dennis and smiled. He then reached into his case and brought out a laptop and fired it up. Take a look at this video and tell me what you see. Terry was the one to respond. It looks like a lot of actors dressed up to play a part in a movie about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There seems to be a lot of people missing, though. That, my dear, is a video recording of the actual event in Liberty Hall, Jason explained. The famous painting by John Trumbull was embellished by the artist to include many who weren't really there. In fact, if you listen to the audio, you'll learn this is just the presentation of a draft of the Declaration, not the actual signing. You're telling me, said Terry, this isn't a movie? This is the real thing? That is exactly what we are telling you, responded Dennis. Oh my God, said Lynn. She and Terry were completely astonished. Looking over to Joe, it seemed he wasn't as surprised. What's with you, Joe? It looks like this is an everyday thing to you, like it isn't anything new, said Terry. It isn't, replied Joe enigmatically. What do you mean? Asked Terry. It isn't, said Jason, because Joe isn't from around here. Are you, Joe? Turning to Terry, Jason continued, In fact, our friend here is actually José Barragón y Cisneros, a man of the sea who landed here on the island about 700 years ago. Terry snapped her gaze over to José, who finally decided to speak and share all he had been keeping secret in his heart. What your friend says is correct. My real name is José Barragón y Cisneros. My father and mother are Arturo and Valera Barragón y Cisneros. I was born in a small village in the central part of Spain called the Extremadura on March 28, 1295. The silence was now deafening. Terry and Lynn sat in their seats staring at José for the longest time, apparently waiting for him to say he was pulling a practical joke on them. When no such confession came, Terry swung her gaze back towards Jason, saying, This is... She couldn't find the words to finish the sentence. José continued his story. When I landed on this island, I was greeted by the race of people you call Galimarians. At the time, they didn't know what to do with me, so their governing body held meetings for the purpose of deciding that. It was their custom to show what happens at those meetings to everybody on the island. So, when I learned they wanted to put me into something called suspended animation, because there weren't enough people present to vote, I was scared. It sounded a lot like a prison to me, and I didn't want to be in prison. I decided I had to get off the island, so I tried. I even stole a golden amulet from them to sell for money to get home. In the end, I realized there was no way I could survive on the open ocean again. So I turned around and came back. I was going to put the amulet back where I found it, but it fell into the ocean somehow. Terry gasped, almost silently. Nobody except her friend Lynn noticed, but after seeing Terry was basically okay, Lynn decided to just ask her about it later.
When I got back, continued Jose, I'd returned to the home where I was staying, and the next morning several people arrived to take me to the suspended animation chamber. They put me in, I fell asleep, and in what felt like a few seconds, there were people waking me up several weeks ago.
Wait, Jason said. You've only been out of the chamber for a few weeks? How did you learn English so quickly? Jose knew it was the effect of the amulet the Galimarians put on him when he had arrived. He wasn't wearing the amulet now, but the effects of it lingered. Since that day, he had the ability to learn things at a lightning speed. English was an easy language for him to learn, so he was fluent in it. He observed that Terry was wearing her amulet all the time, and he also noticed she wasn't forthcoming with the role it was playing in her knowledge of the island and the Galimarian people. For the time being, he decided to keep her secret. I am a fast study, said Jose. I was able to become conversant in a relatively short period. Boy, I guess, observed Dennis. I suppose the Admiral hasn't told you why we're here, has he? Asked Jason. Oh, you mean Admiral Crabapple? Asked Terry with a smirk. Lynn unsuccessfully caught herself from snickering. Jason grinned. It seems we have the same opinion of him. Smiling a toothy smile, Terry replied, You too? Yeah, I don't like to talk about people when they aren't around to defend themselves, but let's just say he isn't on my top 10 list. Yep, he tried to strong-arm Dennis and me a few times, but when that didn't work, he got really mad. Lately, though, he's nice. Too nice. And that's really got me bugged. Anyway, Jason continued, the reason why we're here is because a major volcano in Yellowstone is about to blow. I know, said Terry. Yes, I suppose you do know all about that, said Jason. Because of that volcano, I'm here to learn all I can about the tectonic stabilization machine and the Galimarian people. Once I do that, then I'm going back in time, deliver them antibiotics to fight against the diseases our good friend Jose brought them, then try to get back home without causing any grandfather paradoxes. The same exclamation was uttered by Terry, Lynn, and Jose at the same time, but for different reasons. What? Jose was the first to follow that up with another question.
Are you telling me I am to blame for all of them dying?
I'm sorry, Jose, but that is exactly what I'm telling you. The news that he was the whole reason why the Galimarian people died was a severe blow to him. Up to this point, he didn't have a clue as to why they all died. To learn this now was utterly heartbreaking. Like Terry, he had formed somewhat of an attachment to the people he only met for a few days. Certainly, he reasoned, how could you not come to respect such an amazing race of people?
Ay, Dios mío,
cried Jose in his mother tongue. While few in the room spoke Spanish, they knew what he must be feeling. Terry was the next one to blurt out a burning question. Did you just say you're going back in time? Correct, replied Jason. This portal can do that? Asked Terry. Correct. Terry's response was to sit back in her seat and exhale loudly. After a few moments of introspection on the part of all present, Jason related the experiments he and Dennis undertook, leading them to discover the portal has the ability to allow not only physical travel, but also time travel. Jason described how the sheet of paper flew into and through the portal while they were watching the Great Chicago Fire, then instantly burned. With a smile on his face, he even told them how he and Dennis were hungry one afternoon, so they went to China, got some real Chinese food, and brought it back to the portal room for lunch. That got some chuckles from a few very amazed people. The rest of the day was spent walking to and spending time in the underground room housing the tectonic stabilization machine, or TSM. While in the room, Terry connected to the amulet companion in charge of the TSM, Kalius. Even though Jason and Dennis had been dealing with some amazing technology of their own design, talking with a synthetic sentient life form was nothing less than staggering. Kalius entertained any questions they put to her, and was able to describe to Jason the exact nature of the malfunction. For her part, Kalius was impressed with Jason's command of physics. He decided not to elaborate why he wanted to know so much about the TSM and his plans on traveling back in time to visit with the Galimarians. The real reason he wanted to know so much was because his foreknowledge of the machine would help the Galimarians accept who he said he was. After meeting with Kalius in the underground TSM control center, the group went back to the surface, found a park where they could all sit, and struck up conversations with each other. Dennis, Lynn, and Jose were in one conversation, while Jason sat about 3 meters from them talking with Terry. "I have to say," said Terry in a more reverent manner, "I'm impressed with you, Dr. Marsalis. You really seem to know your stuff." Normally at this moment she would have checked his ring finger to see if the man was a candidate for a relationship, but she knew her heart belonged to only one person, someone she would never get to meet. "And I have to say, Dr. Lindstrom, I am just as impressed with your grasp of the Galimarian culture," said Jason. "How did you learn so much about it?" "A lot came from archival footage I've spent hours viewing in my room," said Terry. "Can I see an example?" asked Jason. Terry smiled, knowing once again she would be able to see her soulmate's face. Leaning over, Terry said in a loud voice to Lynn, "Jason and I are going to look at some of the archival footage. Do you want to go or stay here?" Dennis decided wherever Lynn wanted to go, that's where he wanted to be, since he was already falling head over heels for this brunette beauty. Jose was content with staying with Lynn and Dennis, although not for the same reason. Lynn told Terry, "I think I'd like to just soak in some nature for a while. How about we meet you back at the lounge in 2 hours?" "Sounds good," Terry replied. She and Jason walked to the building where Terry's apartment was located, and, after ascending in the elevator, they entered the room Jason had already seen once before, when the portal happened to locate there. "This room is just as beautiful as I remember," said Jason, "although I didn't turn around to see the rest of it behind where the portal was oriented. This is a pretty big place." "Indeed it is, but sometimes I just like to sit here on the couch and feel the light breeze floating by as the night sky comes," replied Terry. "I can imagine," acknowledged Jason. Looking over to the computer terminal, Terry asked, "Do you want to meet Krelon?" "Krelon?" asked Jason. "He's the original occupant of this apartment. Would you like to meet him?" asked Terry. "Here? Now?" asked a visibly startled Jason. "It's not what you're thinking," laughed Terry. With a more somber tone, Terry said, "In the back is a room I rarely go into. It is his bedroom, and where his remains are still." Jason could tell this was something that touched Terry deeply. Taking in a deep breath, he said, "If you're okay with that, I would like it very much." Without saying a word, Terry turned around and started walking toward the back of the apartment. Opening a door in the rear, Terry and Jason entered the room where a bed was located in the center of the far wall. Jason stepped forward to get a closer look, then stopped. Standing there, he felt this room was a sort of mausoleum. This was a place to show respect for the dead. Holding his left wrist with his right hand, Jason stood quietly in respect for the original occupant of the home. Remembering the name of the person lying before him, Jason said, "Krelon, I want to thank you for allowing us to spend time in your home. I hope to bring the honor and respect that it and you deserve." Terry was shocked. She remembered saying something similar when she arrived at this apartment. It was at that moment she learned Jason was a man of character and integrity. Unlike Admiral What's-His-Name, who couldn't be bothered to even look at Krelon, let alone show this kind of respect. Glancing from Jason over to her soulmate, Krelon, Terry's eyes began to moisten as she once again beheld the man of her dreams, an alien who had died 600 or 700 years earlier. After gazing at Krelon, Jason thought of a question he wanted to ask Terry. Turning around, he was stopped short by the look of profound sadness on her face. Whatever he was going to ask quickly left his mind, and now the only question was, "Would you like to talk about it?" Terry tore her eyes away from Krelon and looked at Jason pleadingly. He stepped forward, gently taking Terry's elbow to lead her back out of the living room. As they sat down on the couch, Jason said the same thing he would say to Mickey whenever something was bothering her. "Talk to me, Terry. What is it?" She was looking down at her lap when he said that, and after wiping away a stray tear which refused to stay put in her eye, said, "Jason, I can tell you are a man of character. You aren't like any of those military schmoes walking around here. You actually care. You're a man of principle. When you asked how I knew so much about the island and the Galimarian people, I wasn't completely honest. While it's true I have learned quite a bit from the archival footage, there is actually a more significant source for the information I possess. Do you remember Jose telling us about the amulet he had stolen that had somehow been lost while he was at sea? Remember how he thought it had fallen overboard?" "Yes," replied Jason. "Well, I found it," said Terry. "How?" "To be perfectly accurate, I didn't find it. A man named Cyrus Field did." "Cyrus Field? The guy who laid the first telegraph cable across the Atlantic?" asked Jason. "One and the same," replied Terry. "Did you know the first expedition had a problem with the ship going off course?" "I seem to have read something, now that you mention it. If I remember correctly, they attributed it to a magnetic field generated by the coiled wire on board the ship," answered Jason. "Correct. That's what people were told. What they weren't told was the coiled cable wasn't the reason for them going off course." "It wasn't?" "No," replied Terry. Reaching for something around her neck, she pulled out a small golden amulet at the end of a gold chain. Showing it to Jason, she said, "This is what caused the ship to go off course." "What's that?" asked Jason. "This," said Terry, "is a Galimarian amulet, similar to the one Jose said he lost at sea. In fact, it might be the very same one." "How could an amulet make a ship go off course?" asked Jason. "On one particular day, the cable Cyrus was laying snapped, and the end of the cable they had already laid fell down to the seafloor. They used a dredging hook to find the cable and bring it back up. When it came up to the surface, this amulet was magnetically stuck to the hook. They brought it on board, and for a time it was kept in a drawer near the ship's compass, which is how it drove the ship off course. Okay, so how did you get the amulet? Asked Jason. Before working here on this island, I worked at the New York Museum of Natural History, answered Terry. I am an archaeologist by trade, and I was working in the archive basement cataloging all the old relics down there. I found this amulet where it had been scuttled away after that voyage. Jason squinted his eyebrows, but then asked, Interesting story, but how does that relate to why you know so much about the island? Reverently holding the amulet in her hands, Terry said, It is because I discovered in the museum basement that this amulet contains a sentient life form named Corlin, and she has become my companion and best friend. She has taught me an incredible amount of information about this amazing race of beings. I have learned enough to now consider myself Galimarian as well. In fact, Corlin and the millions of others like her all now consider me to be Galimarian. This new revelation was staggering to Jason. Right there in Terry's hands was a sentient life form, one who had such a complete and complex personality that Terry could consider it, her, to be her best friend? As he began smiling, Jason thought, This is next level cool. Seeing how he was completely in awe over the information she had just shared with him, Terry got up and walked over to the computer terminal. Jason rose and followed her. Terry removed the amulet from around her neck and placed it in the cradle on the side of the terminal. Within a few seconds, the face of an incredibly beautiful woman with dark black eyes and slightly pointed ears appeared on the screen. Jason, this is Corlin, my amulet companion and best friend. Corlin, this is Dr. Jason Marsalis. He is a man of honor, who I now consider to be my friend. He has invented technology which will allow him to travel back in time and correct the disaster to our Galimarian brothers and sisters. He will bring them medicine to cure their illnesses, so they won't have to die, so they can be with us again. With that explanation, Corlin's eyes enlarged, and her head dipped slightly, indicating her disbelief that this would even be a possibility. Seeing that Terry was completely serious, Corlin looked at Jason and asked, Is this true? Can you really do this? In awe of the fact he was about to converse with a synthetic sentient being, Jason replied, That is correct. I am here to learn as much as I can about this wonderful race of beings. I would count it a privilege to know more about them, and hopefully I may count you as my friend as well. Corlin looked back to Terry, who had a very big smile on her face. Terry simply said, Told ya.
Corlin nodded, acknowledging she and Terry were thinking the same thing. Corlin then looked at Jason again. Dr. Marsalis, I am indeed very glad to make your acquaintance. I know Terry doesn't quickly call people her friends unless there is good reason for it. Since she feels you are her friend, then I will as well. I wish to thank you in advance for doing whatever you can to help our people. Thank you, Corlin. And you may call me Jason from now on, he said. I very much hope I can be of service to this amazing race of people. I would really like to know more, but unfortunately I don't have a great deal of time to learn the spoken or written language.
so I'm going to have to rely on you and Terry to teach me as much as possible. Terry looked at Corlin. My friend, is there any reason why he can't? Knowing exactly what Terry was thinking, Corlin replied, None whatsoever. That would certainly give him a leg up, as you like to say. Why I couldn't what? Leg up on what? Asked Jason. Smiling at Jason, she told Corlin, I'll see you in a little while, my friend. After Corlin smiled and dipped her head in a sign of respect, Terry reached over, plucked the amulet from the cradle, and handed it to Jason. With 3 words, Terry rocked Jason's world. Put it on.
Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.